Here it is, guys, the worst of the worst. The saddest accident that's ever happened at any theme park, water park, amusement park, whatever you call it. The Verrucht water slide decapitation. A tragedy that obviously should have never happened and was completely avoidable. I guarantee that all of you, every single one of you watching the video right now, has at least heard about the Verrucht waterslide accident. Hell, you have probably already seen at least one video about the Verrucht accident because there is just so much content to sift through. Seriously, there are so many videos about Verrucht. It's been milked to death. Of course, some of these videos, they're more well-researched than others. They're very caring and respectful about the tragedy. However, others, they kind of lean into that true crime gore junk that kind of makes this accident feel more like a spectacle as opposed to a real-life event. It's disgusting. The entire situation about Verrucht has been dissected and relayed over and over again. I mean, the accident itself, it's old news. It happened over 10 years ago, but it's amazing how we're still seeing ripple effects from that event, still making waves over a decade later. Honestly, today I'm more curious about the perpetrators of the accident than the accident itself, and how the perpetrators of the accident, they got away with it. Yes, the people who were responsible for one of the most gruesome waterslide accidents in history got off scot-free. All charges were dropped against them, and they walked. No jail time, no nothing. How did this happen? Because this wasn't some freak accident where it was completely unavoidable, like maybe there was some kind of human error where it was just a mistake, or it was a series of unfortunate events that led to this. No, in my opinion, and I am saying in my opinion, because technically the perpetrators were recused of all crimes and wrongdoing, this accident, it appeared like a case of malice. The park owners and the park operators of Slitterbahn, they were definitely aware about Verrucht's troubles. They knew about all the different incidents that predated the August 7th decapitation, but it seems like they didn't think those incidents were relevant enough to actually fix Verrucht, so they swept them all under the rug and allowed the waterslide to continuously operate until eventually a 10-year-old lost his life. And now today, presently, I'm just sitting here scratching my head thinking, how did these guys get away with it? How can a case that seemed so clear-cut go in the complete opposite direction and have all the charges dismissed with no contest? Well, let's take a deep dive and look at the case to find out exactly what went wrong and how the justice system failed us. Once again, I'm going to reiterate the Verrucht waterslide accident. It's been covered extensively many times before, so I'm not going to dwell on the details for too long. I'm going to give you a little background and context for what happened, so I can effectively set the groundwork for how the case was argued in court. So, the Verrucht waterslide debuted in July of 2014 as the world's tallest waterslide at a staggering 168 feet. The slide itself, it had two major elements, the first drop and an airtime hill. At first it seemed like an ambitious project. I mean, tallest water slide in the world, how can you go wrong with that? It's scary, it's intense, it'll for sure put Slitterbahn on the map. The stars, they could have theoretically aligned for this Kansas City water park, but there was one glaring issue that would stifle this attraction. That being the designers of the Verrucht, they didn't actually know how to build a water slide. Slitterbahn, they didn't actually go with any reputable water slide manufacturers like ProSlide. Instead, they decided to build the entire attraction in-house by them and them alone, which in some situations, this can be perfectly fine. However, for Slitterbahn's case, they were not qualified to build a water slide. The designer, he was not an engineer, he did not understand physics, and he certainly did not know how to build something of this magnitude. If you don't believe me, well, you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
True, you're a high school dropout?
No, sir, it's not. I have a high school diploma from New Braunfels High School.
He does not have any formal education in terms of engineering or physics, correct?
And neither did Henry Ford, and he built the car.
The lead designer was in fact so underqualified to take on this project that the original airtime hill that came immediately after the first drop needed to be completely overhauled and reprofiled so the tubes would stop going airborne. But I'm sure after the new airtime hill was installed, all of these problems would be completely mitigated and the rafts would never go airborne again, right? On the fateful day of August 7th, 2016, 3 riders would board the Verrucht. 2 women and 1 10-year-old boy. In order for the 3 passengers to get on the Verrucht, they would need a combined weight between 400 and 550 pounds. Why? Well, if the riders didn't reach this weight requirement, the tube would be at risk of going airborne. You can see where I'm getting at here. The riders, they did not meet the weight requirement, yet they were still able to ride. When they boarded the raft, the little boy, he got in the front row. One of the women, she sat in the middle, and the other got in the rear. This is actually the correct way of riding the water slide. You want to have the lightest person in front and the heaviest in the back. This way, it centers the mass of the tube towards the rear. And as the raft goes over a hill, inertia wants the raft to keep moving forward and slightly upward. With more mass in the back, torque from gravity pulls the nose down and helps the raft stay on track. However, in this case, it didn't matter because the raft was too light, so the raft was able to lift up due to the centrifugal force and vertical acceleration. When the vehicle reached the hill, it started to go airborne, and then suddenly it slammed into the metal bracing that supported the netting around the track. The little boy who was sitting in front, he unfortunately made direct contact with one of the metal bars and subsequently died via decapitation. The women in the middle and rear, they fortunately survived. However, they suffered severe facial lacerations and broken jaws. Emergency crews, they were later called and arrived at the scene in roughly 10 minutes. And witnesses who were present during the incident, they saw the gruesome aftermath. I'm not going to describe what they saw because I don't want to, but you guys can get a pretty good idea by just reading between the lines. This was all a very tragic scene, and again, it should have never happened, and what we would find out later during discovery of the incident, it could have all been completely avoided if it wasn't for the perpetrators of this crime. On March 21st of 2018, a full 2 years after the incident, the District Court of Wyandotte County, Kansas, they indicted 3 defendants who they believed were indirectly responsible. Defendant number 1 was the co-owner of Slitterbahn, Jeff Henry. He was seen as the visionary of the Verrucht waterslide. He was the one who was pushing to build the ride. He was also the one who decided to build the waterslide in-house and to fast-track the construction. And he is seen as a primary culprit who prioritized spectacle over safety. Defendant number 2, he was known as John Scully. Is that how I say his name? You know what? I don't care. Scully, he was the lead designer on the Verrucht. He built the ride based on the concept he got from Mr. Henry. However, he had no formal training in engineering, or physics for that matter. He was not a true designer. He didn't really know what he was doing. Most of his quote-unquote engineering methods involved trial and error. And it's pretty evident that this was the case because they had to completely reconfigure the first airtime hill. Engineers, they may not always get things right on the first try. Failure is part of the experience, but this is unacceptable. An element like this should have never made it past the design phase. Defendant number 3 was known as Tyler Miles, the operations manager of Slitterbahn, and his role was being in charge of the ride's daily safety and maintenance. And allegedly, during his tenure here, he ignored incident reports, he ignored noticeable problems with Raft B on the Verrucht, that being it was going faster than the other rafts, and he refused to take it out of circulation. And most importantly, he allowed the Verrucht to remain open despite the growing number of safety concerns. And oh boy, were there a lot of safety concerns. The 2016 decapitation was not the only incident that occurred on the Verrucht. There's actually a long laundry list of incidents that stretch all the way back to 2014, the year the Verrucht debuted. From what I can find in the indictment report, there was a staggering 13 different accidents that were a result of the Verrucht. 13! And those were the ones that the court was able to find. Apparently, when the court was trying to subpoena evidence, this was all they were able to gather. They couldn't find every case because supposedly not every incident was reported, and the few that were could have apparently been altered because some of the witness testimony was changed after the fact. But the cases where the court was able to verify authenticity, they revealed a clear pattern of willful ignorance. Because after each and every accident that was happening on a weekly basis, the Verrucht continued to remain operational. I'm not going to go over every single accident that took place on the Verrucht, but I am going to give you a quick rundown on what these injuries were. Starting on August 31st, 2014, we had a concussion followed by a slipped spinal disc then another concussion, then neck pain, whiplash, abrasions, bruising, broken toes, laceration, foot injury, herniated spinal disc, jawbone fractures, laceration, concussion, another laceration, concussion. And let me remind you, this all happened within a span of 2 years. Yet the park, they didn't do anything to rectify these accidents and prevent them from happening again. In fact, it seems like they were traveling great lengths to cover up their sloppiness. You want to know how many misdeeds the park was accused of when all the information came to light? 40. There are 40 statements of fact in the indictment that displays some form of wrongdoing or pattern of neglect on the park's end. Now, I'm not going to go over every statement because, oh man, this thing goes on for 20 pages, but I am going to read off a few just so I can give you an idea of how scummy this park is. Quoting from the document, Statement 27 goes as follows. Henry's rush schedule affected quality control. A steel detainer named Ronald Miller, who was hired to assist in the Verruck construction, emailed project manager Catherine, last Namowitz, to voice his concerns. I'll be honest with you. We were forced to ship this tower platform way too early. There are still many unknowns. We would have saved a lot more time and money if everything was figured out here at the plant. I've been telling people for months that it was imperative to have all the stuff figured out prior to shipment. My request fell on deaf ears. And instead of dealing with these questions in a controlled environment, where we have the materials and resources to resolve this matter, it is going to have to be done on the fly, in the air, on a structure that is galvanized. Statement number 33. When rumors and news reports emerged about the airborne rafts, a Slitterbond spokesperson publicly discredited these reports. Meanwhile, Henry and Escuela began secretly testing at night to avoid scrutiny. Statement number 34. Schooley disclosed. The worst possible thing that could happen is that we have miscalculated it again. There's many things we've changed, and we again put the raft into the air. That would cause us to come back and redo what we just did and reconstruct and redesign the ride again. It would be a disaster. Statement number 40. HSC hired an outside engineering firm to perform accelerometer testing on the rafts as they went down the Verruck. On July 3rd, 2014, 1 week before Verruck's grand opening, the accelerometer test result data indicated that the rafts in the weight range of 400 to 450 pounds would likely go airborne at the crest of the second hill. I could go on. The statements, they keep getting worse. From ignoring accident reports to witness testimonies, and a disturbing lack of safety measures that blatantly disregards basic American ride test standards. All of this evidence is very incriminating, so I don't understand how these three stooges got away with it. It's either they had a really good lawyer, you know, like a criminal lawyer, or the prosecution, they just sucked. Actually, that was exactly the case. The prosecution did suck. But don't take my word for it. Take it from the judge himself, because he dropped all of the charges, primarily because of the prosecution's incompetence. Despite the mountain of evidence that the prosecution had at their disposal, they decided to devote all of the resources into two claims that had no legal basis or precedent to the case. The first argument dealt with a Travel Channel episode that was deemed as nothing more than fiction, and the second argument was about a testimony on an ASTM safety standard that was not required under Kansas law. So what the prosecutors did was, instead of focusing on the evidence that was given to them and crafting an argument from that, they decided to harp on a travel news episode that was deemed as nothing more than scripted reality TV, and a safety standard that didn't even apply to the state they were in. What the heck, seriously? The prosecutors actually tried using a reality TV episode as fact? That's like me grabbing a clickbait YouTube video and trying to pass it as fact. In what world would this argument even work? It's ridiculous. What if I walked into court and I was trying to prove malice on a roller coaster accident? And I said to the judge, Your Honor, I recreated the exact same ride in Roller Coaster Tycoon. And according to this very realistic ride simulator, not only was I able to recreate the accident, but the coaster actually derailed as well. So this video game proves that the roller coaster was more dangerous than we initially thought. It's a garbage argument, no matter which way you slice it. Same with the ASTM standards. Now, it is true that most amusement parks, they should comply with ASTM, which is the globally recognized safety standards for amusement rides. However, since Slitterbond was in Kansas, they technically didn't need to abide by these standards. Legally speaking, they had the right to self-inspect their attractions. Now, should they have had that right to begin with? No. they shouldn't have? Has the world truly learned nothing from Action Park? The ability to allow Slitterbond to self-inspect literally just creates the meme, "We investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong." Now, there are other reasons for why the judge dismissed all the criminal charges, which included manslaughter, second-degree murder, aggravated battery ×5, aggravated endangering of a child, interference with law enforcement, criminal conspiracy to obstruct. All of these charges were dropped largely in part to these two arguments. Quoting from the judge himself, "It is a basic legal proposition that the court must apply the law of the state of Kansas to the facts as it finds them. I obviously recognize that the circumstances and events giving rise to these indictments are indisputably tragic. A young child's life was lost, and its troubling death was mourned by family, friends, and the entire Kansas City community and beyond. Additionally, the investigation revealed many others were injured when they were supposed to be enjoying the thrill of the world's tallest water slide. But the decision to dismiss these charges at this time does not preclude the possibility that the state could continue to pursue this matter in a criminal court." By the way, no other charges were filed after this. The state could take its evidence to a different grand jury which hasn't been exposed to or irreputably tainted by the introduction of illegal evidence, or the state could pursue the more traditional means in Kansas and file a criminal complaint and proceed to a preliminary hearing wherein a judge would hear the evidence and determine if probable cause exists, and if so, order these defendants to stand trial on some or all of these charges." End quote. In the end, the three parties who were responsible for the Verrückt waterside accident, they walked. They got away with it. No other charges were brought forward, and none of the previous indictments were able to stick. And justice did not prevail. Fortunately, there is a small bit of positive news from this whole situation. For one, the family, they did win their civil case for a wrongful death settlement. They came out to a total of $20 million, and the Slitterbond Water Park in Kansas, it did shut down in 2018, and was torn down shortly after. But at the end of the day, this isn't enough. These guys should have went to prison. It's so disheartening to hear that the only reason why none of these guys saw the inside of a jail cell was because the prosecution was incompetent. Hopefully though, karma will find its way. Apparently, the co-owner, Jeff Henry, he was charged in 2021 for an unrelated situation involving methamphetamine and hiring I can't say the P word, for hiring an escort, yeah. And yes, all of these charges were soon translated into a felony. Hopefully it won't be too much longer for him to slip up again and get arrested for a more serious crime.